Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Green Flamingo Emerging Markets Central Banks and Climate Risk session. We are very glad to have you all here with us today. We would like to start by thanking our sponsors, JP Morgan, Credit Suisse, Ping An, Moody's ESG Solutions, Luxembourg Green Exchange, Citi, Refinitiv, BNP Paribas, IHS Markit, Allianz Bernstein, FSD Africa, Inter-American Development Bank, ICMA, Mizuho, IFC, and Ashurst. Without your support, this conference would not be possible. Before we start, I would just like to give a few important reminders. The Q&A box is there for you to ask questions. Other comments and queries, you can use the chat. We do have live interpretation available in Portuguese, Spanish, Mandarin, and French. Look for the headphone icon at the bottom of your screen. All sessions are being recorded. You can listen to it until November. Please use the cool tools that SwapCard offers. You can network with thousands of attendees. Please check out our virtual booths. For the media, our comms team is available for any interview requests. Please visit the Climate Bonds virtual booth to arrange an interview. Many thanks for your presence and enjoy your session. Now, Jean will be presenting our amazing speakers. Jean, over to you.
Thank you very much, Louisa. I very much appreciate being back at the CBI annual conference this day. The CBI has decided to set up a Green Flamingo session, and Green Flamingo is a very strange animal. I think over the past few months, we've learned to fear green swans. But and I was wondering, what actually should we make of green flamingo? I would like to get you today to admire green flamingos on these exotic birds that would represent in my mind green finance flying high in emerging markets. So I'd like you to join me in a 1 hour tour du monde around the globe with our very distinguished panelists from central banks, from flying east to west, Malaysia and Philippines. So we are glad to have Jessica and Lucia as deputy governors from the Central Bank of Malaysia and Philippines. And then moving on to the east, further to the east, 3 heads of sustainable finance units in the central banks of Brazil. That would be Ricardo. The Central Bank of Morocco, welcome Najwa. And in the Central Bank of Hungary, last but not least, welcome Gabor. And we are also joined by Prashant as a very expert fellow, having a global view and perhaps some insight into some of our other countries. Maybe we can start with a quick tour du monde, which with each and every one of you, to give us your own perspective of the current state of play in sustainable finance in your country and more globally. And if you allow me to let the floor to Jessica. Jessica, the floor is yours for the Malaysian perspective.
Thank you very much, John. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everyone. So it's really my privilege to be here to be able to join my fellow panelists on this session. A year ago, I think few of us would have imagined that we would still be struggling in many parts of the world to deal with the widespread COVID infections and their significant economic ramifications. That said, this exceptional period has also intensified the focus on climate change, and specifically its calamitous impact and the fact that we are running out of time. To emphasize the point, some have described the COVID crisis as only a dress rehearsal to a much larger climate crisis looming. This is not lost on emerging economies in the ASEAN region. In a recent report published by ASEAN central banks, it was noted that if these effects from climate change continue unmitigated, ASEAN countries face possible GDP per capita losses of between 0.7 to 8.5% by 2100. The cost would be even higher if we account for additional international spillover effects. At this very same event last year, I spoke about how the financial system can, and indeed must, play a pivotal role to support a sustainable recovery from the COVID crisis. I also spoke about how we have been ramping up our supervisory engagements with the financial institutions that we regulate on climate risk since 2019, and the positive responses we were beginning to observe within the Malaysian financial sector. Since then, we have continued to see good traction in concrete actions taken by the financial institutions that are contributing towards greater climate resilience. In particular, we're seeing this in the areas of governance and strategy, risk management, and capacity building. That said, we are, however, still not yet where we need to be in terms of the foundations and enablers that we believe are critical and necessary to better support and further strengthen the financial sector's response to climate risk. So if you will, just allow me to mention some of the areas that we are currently focused on as a matter of priority. First, frameworks and related guidance that support credible risk assessments and encourage financial flows towards greening the economy. The central bank has issued the climate change and principle-based taxonomy, which serves two important objectives. First, to direct financial flows towards climate resilient activities, and secondly, to provide a consistent means for capturing the financial system's exposures to transition and physical risks based on more granular assessments at both the economic activity and counterparty levels. Importantly for us, the taxonomy recognizes the importance of transition factors in our economy and the substantial risks of macroeconomic and social dislocations that can result from disorderly adjustments. So the classification system reflects this by considering both an economic activity's contributions to climate risk mitigation or adaptation and the business entity's overall impact on the environment, including whether it credibly demonstrates a commitment and willingness to reduce harm to the environment. Our current focus is on guiding the consistent implementation of this taxonomy. We have issued sector-specific guides to help financial institutions conduct detailed impact-based ESG risk assessments, and we will continue to develop new ones to support the implementation of the taxonomy. Our second priority has been on developing better tools to support climate risk management practices. The bank will also be issuing a reference guide on climate risk management and scenario analysis by year end to provide minimum expectations and guidance to financial institutions. In parallel, we're working to develop localized climate risk scenarios for stress testing, building on the work of the NGFS. These efforts are in preparation for announced plans by the bank to conduct industry-wide climate change stress tests in 2024. Thirdly, we are working to enhance data and disclosures. Through something that we've set up, this is the Joint Committee on Climate Change. We are collaborating with key partners and stakeholders to address critical data gaps, which we believe are necessary to support the financial sector's response to climate risk. This includes climate-related data that is relevant for investment and lending decisions, macroeconomic modeling, stress testing, scenario analysis, and product development. It will also support climate risk-related disclosures by financial institutions. And to that end, we actually aim to finalize plans this year for mandatory climate risk-related disclosures in the financial sector, which are aligned with the TCFD. While these plans will take into account the different stages of maturity in climate risk management currently observed across our industry, they are also intended to accelerate progress by institutions. Fourthly, we continue to actively promote an enabling environment for green financing and investment. The priorities that I've already mentioned will directly contribute towards creating conditions that will enhance the supply of green finance. In addition to these priorities, and as part of the bank's mandate to promote a progressive and inclusive financial system, we are also looking to augment the bank's funds for SMEs to support the transition by smaller firms to reduce their carbon footprint. Finally, we are working with our counterparts in the region to further strengthen cooperation and coordination in support of efforts to increase climate resilience across the region. A key development has been the launch of a regional initiative to develop an ASEAN taxonomy, which seeks to promote consistent standards for classifying sustainable economic activities. The taxonomy will build on common principles with a tiering system to cater to the differences of member states' financial systems, economic and social structures, and transition paths. This aims to preserve appropriate flexibilities for localized adoption while encouraging financial flows consistent with orderly transitions across ASEAN member states. As a final note, I would just add that ambitions by emerging economies to cut emissions and ensure sustainable development over the next decades will also be critically shaped by global actions. Climate equity is an issue that will become increasingly important as smaller emerging economies strive to achieve orderly transitions while having to contend with external impacts of net zero policies that are more widely adopted across the world. This could significantly complicate the efforts. So for this reason, coordinated global and collective actions must not only be sustained, but intensified to deliver equitable outcomes for society. So let me just end there, and I'll be happy to participate in discussion later. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jessica. I think every time I have a chat with, I have an opportunity to discuss with an NGFS member, I'm struck by how similar are the challenges for everybody and how much it makes sense for us to come together to work on that. If you allow me now, maybe we can turn to Gabor to go back to Hungary. Gabor, what's your perspective on these developments and what are you focusing on?
Actually, there are no flamingos in Hungary, but still I think there are many similarities in Hungary to what has been previously said. I should, of course, mention that Hungary is part of the EU, part of the OECD, but still we do not really have a very developed financial system. Hungary is still an emerging market. And of course, as a consequence, also the green finance market used to be, well, almost non-existing couple of years ago, and I can tell you that basically there was extremely low awareness of climate risks in the financial system, no proper ESG risk management, and actually it wasn't even on the radar of the Central Bank of Hungary a couple of years ago. But of course, as guardians of the financial stability, we also had to start understanding the potential financial implications of climate change in Hungary. And scientific evidence, of course, tells us that Hungary is within Europe, among the more vulnerable countries. So, I mean, IPCC reports and the local Hungarian chapters of IPCC told us that we have to be aware of the physical impacts of climate change. In Hungary, of course, it's again a set of multiple impacts, but let me just mention as a specific example, water imbalances, droughts or flash floods, and it's already happening now in Hungary. And of course, science tells us that it's getting more and more severe. But of course, it's not just the physical impacts in Hungary. You also need to be aware of the transition channel. And of course, being part of the EU, which has a very, very ambitious climate policy, of course, and being an open economy, an emerging open economy, of course, transition risks are also substantial. Let me just mention one example. For instance, the car industry is very important in Hungary. And of course, the car industry is very much exposed to climate change mitigation policies. And of course, we still haven't reached the state where we completely understand all the potential implications of all the various climate scenarios. Just like many other central banks, we are also working on our own climate stress test. But we can already see now from preliminary results that a failed transition would be an extremely bad message, bad outcome for the financial system, resulting in rising NPL levels. And also our preliminary results of our ongoing stress test exercise shows that successful transition, a Paris orderly transition, would be good news for financial stability. And this is basically guiding all actions. As a central bank, of course, we are putting climate risk, and not just climate, but also environmental risks more in general into our focus. So we are trying to nudge and help and encourage banks via various measures to improve their risk management frameworks about climate change and also other environmental issues. But we also think that the other side of the coin, actively greening the financial system, is important. Again, I think I can just a little bit echo what Jessica has also mentioned, and especially because, like I said, Hungarian financial system is not really developed. Basically, we didn't have a green finance segment a couple of years ago. This also, in our perspective, justifies a more activist role as a central bank. So we are very much trying to introduce and explore ways how we can encourage banks to increase the supply of green financing. Also asset managers to increase the supply of green funds or ESG managed investment funds. So all in all, to provide a more favorable financial system for green investments in Hungary. And of course, I'm very happy to share more details in the panel. That's just in a nutshell, a short introduction where Hungary is in this journey of green finance.
Thanks a lot, Gabor. I would take 2 points out of your initial presentation. First, the importance of physical risk, which I think is something that will be a common theme across the panel, and also the more activist role that you intend to play to develop green finance. Let me now turn to Ricardo, and before I leave him the floor, just tell everybody that Ricardo will be speaking in Spanish, and there will be a translation in English, but it may take some time, so bear with us in that respect. And Ricardo, I think you have something quite strong actually to say about physical risk and agriculture.
Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite. Gostaria de começar inicialmente cumprimentando meus colegas de painel e agradecer o convite da CBI para participar desse importante evento. Vou falar rapidamente aqui da abordagem do Banco Central do Brasil em relação a essa agenda de sustentabilidade, dar uma rápida visão sobre algumas das iniciativas regulatórias que a gente colocou em consulta pública no mês de março e abril desse ano e que estão sendo finalizadas e devem ser anunciadas agora na semana que vem. O primeiro ponto que eu gostaria de fazer é que me parece claro que enfrentar o desafio das mudanças climáticas vai exigir a ação de todos, né? Dos governos, dos legisladores, dos bancos centrais e da sociedade em geral. Eu acho que o papel, na nossa visão, o papel dos bancos centrais nesse processo é assegurar que o setor financeiro está pronto para financiar esse processo, mas também gerenciar adequadamente os riscos decorrentes dessa mudança. Então, em resumo, o papel dos bancos centrais nessa agenda poderiam ser resumidos em 3 principais. Primeiro, ajudar na conscientização dos potenciais riscos decorrentes das mudanças climáticas, assegurar que o sistema financeiro esteja preparado para gerenciar adequadamente esses riscos e, por último, dar transparência a esses riscos e as oportunidades decorrentes desse processo e que as externalidades negativas que são geradas pelas atividades poluentes e degradantes ao meio ambiente fiquem evidenciadas e sejam adequadamente precificadas e haja também uma disciplina de mercado. O Banco Central do Brasil tem atuado exatamente dessa forma. No aspecto da conscientização, a mera inclusão de um pilar de sustentabilidade na nossa agenda institucional no ano passado, em setembro do ano passado, ajudou a acender uma luz amarela no sistema financeiro brasileiro para o tema e as instituições financeiras estão bem mais atentas a essas questões na forma como conduzem os seus negócios. Na mesma linha, a gente colocou, como eu comentei, 3 consultas públicas que lidam exatamente com os outros 2 pontos, né? A questão um melhor gerenciamento dos riscos socioambientais e climáticos pelas instituições financeiras e uma maior transparência sobre os riscos e oportunidades relacionadas a esse tema. Em 2014, a gente, como resultado de uma discussão que se iniciou durante a conferência da Rio+20, a gente teve um marco histórico em termos de regulamentação ESG no Brasil, com a publicação de uma norma que determinava para as instituições financeiras o gerenciamento do risco socioambiental e o estabelecimento da sua própria política de responsabilidade socioambiental. Então, o Banco Central do Brasil teve um papel pioneiro aí entre os bancos centrais dentro dessa temática. Nesse momento agora, a primeira consulta pública é um aprimoramento dessa norma de 2014 para incluir explicitamente a ótica climática, né, nas suas duas dimensões de risco, tanto físico como de transição. Além disso, a gente está sendo requerido das instituições financeiras apliquem de forma integrada aos riscos social, ambiental e climático os mesmos requisitos gerais já aplicáveis aos riscos mais tradicionais aí do setor bancário, né? Risco de crédito, mercado, operacional, liquidez. Então, a gente também está obrigando as instituições financeiras a publicarem suas próprias políticas de responsabilidade social, ambiental e climática. Essa política nada mais é do que um conjunto de princípios e diretrizes de natureza social, ambiental e climática estabelecidas pela própria instituição que devem orientar aí a condução das suas atividades e a forma como eles se relacionam com os diversos stakeholders da instituição. Além disso, as instituições financeiras ficam obrigadas a dar transparência a ações positivas que serão implementadas para atingir os objetivos da sua política e os critérios de avaliação dessas ações quanto à sua efetividade. Uma segunda consulta pública que a gente está aqui vem complementar a anterior, inspirados nas recomendações da TCFD, a Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosures. Nós estamos propondo novos requisitos mandatórios de transparência para as instituições financeiras em relação aos riscos e oportunidades relacionados aos aspectos sociais, ambientais e climáticos. Então, a gente tem um escopo que vai um pouco além do que recomenda a TCFD, que se limita ao aspecto climático, para também incluir o aspecto social e ambiental. E, por último, a gente tem uma consulta pública relacionada à inclusão de critérios de sustentabilidade na concessão do crédito rural e o desenvolvimento de um birô de crédito rural verde. Esse é um projeto, talvez, dos mais inovadores que o Banco Central está trabalhando ultimamente, é um dos mais interessantes pelo seu potencial disruptivo. Ele envolve aí muita tecnologia, uso de imagem de satélite, conexão com diversas bases de dados governamentais e privadas. Enfim, a CBI, inclusive, foi uma grande parceira nesse projeto, nos ajudou bastante na especificação de critérios de sustentabilidade para o crédito rural. Esse birô ele vai ter um potencial de trazer várias externalidades positivas para a agricultura brasileira, que já possui aí várias iniciativas sustentáveis, e ser um aliado importante no desenvolvimento de títulos verdes, de finanças verdes. Eu vou parar por aqui para não estourar meu tempo e vai ser um prazer discutir um pouco mais essas iniciativas aí durante o painel. Obrigado.
Sorry.
I think some of us could hear the English, but not all of us. So, Jean, I think we're going to just have to carry on.
Yes, I will. Maybe I will just try to make justice to Ricardo's comment for the benefit of all the panelists that may not have been able to get everything that Ricardo said. But just to, I just take away two things from Ricardo. The first is the impact of the Rio and Rio plus 20 processes in getting the Central Bank of Brazil onto the journey toward greening its practices. And I think, I mean, as a French official, I would only say that COP21 had the very same impact on us. So I think it's an important one, even if it's maybe unnoticed from time to time. And the three consultations that you're currently running on, if I'm correct, the integration of social, environmental, and climate risk in the risk policies of banks, mandatory disclosure on climate à la TCFD, I would say, but also on social and environmental aspects, and finally the inclusion of sustainability criteria in lending activities, if I'm correct. And I think that's again justice to the how much work there is in your various jurisdictions. Maybe we can move now to Najwa. Najwa, you're in a similar position to Ricardo, I believe, being the head of the Sustainable Finance Unit at the supervisory side at the Moroccan Central Bank. What's your take on all that? I mean, does your agenda looks like the others?
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from wherever you are. Thanks for having me. I am really pleased to be joining this panel on central bank's roles in managing climate risks. So let me provide a brief overview of the key initiatives that have been already implemented by Banque Maghrib on our journey towards greening the financial system. As you may be already aware of, in Morocco, the central bank has taken the lead in promoting sustainable finance. In the occasion of COP22, that was actually hosted in Marrakesh in 2016, by coordinating the elaboration of a financial system-wide roadmap for sustainable finance. So complementary to this interagency cooperation process at the national level, we have also started progressively building our overall approach and framework to manage and supervise climate and broader environmental risks, but also to support greening the financial system. So let me here highlight just the key pillars and the already existing initiatives. We have started first by closely collaborating with the national stakeholders, following the large combined efforts demonstrated in the COP22 and within the Banking Association. So rapidly, we have also set up an internal structure dedicated to green finance within the Banking Supervision Department in 2019. And we have implemented an early engagement process with banking institutions that we actually supervise to raise their awareness on the significance of these risks and disseminate international best practices. This also helps us to steer the banking industry's efforts in the green finance space. So we have also committed ourselves to contribute to international work on green and sustainable finance by joining the NGFS and the Sustainable Banking Network. We are also sharing the work of the Agents for Financial Inclusion on inclusive green finance. So as a member of the NGFS, we have endorsed recommendations for supervisors, and after this first phase led by voluntary actions, we have issued our first supervisory expectations for banks on managing the financial risks from climate change and environment through governance, risk management frameworks, scenario analysis, and disclosures. So banks are today called to address the financial risks from climate change and environmental decline through their risk management existing frameworks, to involve governance bodies, put in place the scenario analysis and analytical tools to assess future potential impacts, but also to disclose information as regards the practices to managing these risks in accordance with international standards, for instance, the TCFD. And last but not least, we are also being supported by the World Bank on a 2 years working program that aims to implement the necessary supervisory framework and integrate climate-related risks in the supervisory practices indicators and monitoring. So this program aims at, as a first step, to perform the first risk assessment of climate-related risks exposures in the banking sector, but also the vulnerability of banking sector and broader financial sector to future impacts of climate change. So these risk assessment outcomes should also help to inform and help to frame the design of further regulatory developments. So we are planning to issue some guidelines on stress testing and reporting. And the program aims also as a last step to train internal staff of Banque Maghrib to also build our in-house capacities, but also the capacities of banking institutions we currently supervise on how they could best implement the guidelines we have issued and the soon-to-be issued ones. So just to conclude, I would say that from where we stand today and our journey toward greening the financial system, we are keenly aware of the need to overcome some challenges. So capacity building, the implementation of a taxonomy, and the study of the challenges, the key levers, and the drive and the trends of green banking are at the forefront of our agenda. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Najwa. Thank you for the perspective of the Banque Maghrib. If I may just, at least two takeaways on my side. First, thank you for vindicating what I was saying and highlighting the role of the COP22 in your own process. I think that's again the same story as for our Brazilian colleague, and perhaps also for mentioning the importance of the role that international cooperation is playing into Euro action. I think that's an important one. Maybe if I can now turn to Shushi. Shushi, you're Deputy Governor at the Central Bank of the Philippines. You're in a very special position. Again, a very distinguished NGFS member, but the soon-to-be G20 president, if I'm not mistaken. So you may have some views on what needs to happen for the Philippines, but also more globally. So very happy to get your views.
Thank you, John. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So Asia is home to countries that are in varying stages of economic development. And at the same time, these countries are at the front line in terms of facing the effects of climate change. In a report of the Asian Development Bank, it highlighted that developing Asia must invest $1.7 trillion a year in infrastructure until the year 2030 to maintain growth momentum and at the same time respond to climate change. Cognizant of the risks and opportunities that come with climate change, as well as the safety and soundness concerns it could pose on individual financial institutions and the entire system, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas took a deliberate approach to issue the Sustainable Finance Framework in April 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit its peak in the Philippines. We believe that it was the appropriate timing to consider environmental, social, and governance, or the ESG risks, including climate risks, as financial institutions reset their strategies in response to the ongoing pandemic. So the Sustainable Finance Framework sets out the broad expectations on the integration of sustainability principles in the corporate governance, risk management systems, business strategies, and operations of banks. It builds on the corporate and risk governance reform agenda of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas that was gradually implemented through the years. And one of the key elements of the framework is the vital role of the board of directors and senior management as they set the tone of good governance. So the board is expected to institutionalize the adoption of sustainability principles and promote a culture that fosters environmentally and socially responsible business practices. Next, the framework upholds the powerful role of transparency and market discipline in promoting sustainable finance. It provides a short list of disclosure items that must be reflected in the annual reports of banks. And this requirement is broadly aligned with the sustainability reporting guidelines of the Philippine Securities and Exchange Commission for publicly listed companies. Lastly, the framework expects banks to take a wider view on risk management by understanding the transmission channels of environmental risk and climate-related physical and transition risks affecting businesses and households, which may exacerbate the financial risk exposure of banks. So the combined direct impact of physical risks on banks and the indirect effects on their clients and other transaction partners could disrupt bank operations and impair their financial health. So in a study conducted by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas on the impact of extreme weather episodes on the Philippine banking sector, it confirmed that severe weather conditions could adversely impact the banking system, as evidenced by the negative effect on the growth of loans and deposits, as well as loan quality and profitability. In terms of transition risk, the greenhouse gas emissions of the Philippines are equivalent to 0.33% of global GHG emissions. But if new coal power plants will continue to expand in the future, the Philippines could face a $20 billion worth of stranded assets. Now, to lessen this risk exposure, the government has issued a moratorium on greenfield coal power plants to pave the way for new, cleaner, and indigenous technological innovations. Given this, banks have to cautiously reassess their portfolios or exposures to sectors that are vulnerable to either physical or transition risks and consider the results of these assessments in revisiting business strategies and long-term growth prospects. Meanwhile, to estimate the potential impact of the climate risks to the banking system, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas will conduct a vulnerability assessment and climate stress testing exercises in collaboration with the World Bank, the Worldwide Fund Philippines, and volunteer banks. And the results of this exercise will inform the design, type, and granularity of data as we enhance selected prudential reports for surveillance assessment. It will also feed into the development of supplemental guidelines focusing on climate stress testing and scenario analysis. Given the significant strategic and operational adjustments that banks must implement, the framework provides banks with 3 years to transition towards embracing sustainability principles. And during this period, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas will be engaging banks to discuss the actions taken to implement the sustainable finance framework. So Philippine banks are in various stages of implementing sustainability principles. There are banks that have established specific lending desks, encouraging enterprises to invest in renewable energy or energy efficiency solutions, while some have formulated green financing programs targeted for strategic sectors like the micro, small, and medium enterprises and local government units. However, several banks, particularly the community banks, are still grappling on how to move forward and have identified the lack of expertise or skill as a barrier to pursuing sustainable finance. Now, this brings to fore the importance of continued building of capacity, deepening of knowledge, and enhancing or developing skill sets of the banking community in relation to the management of ESG and climate risks. Understanding the risks will unlock the opportunities for banks and translate the same to further scaling up of green or sustainable finance. I will pause here for now, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Shushi. If I can just pick 2 points from your intervention. First, the importance of both physical risk and transition risk on your side, and the numbers you provided were quite significant. And perhaps also to highlight the role that the MDBs can play in your own strategies. And finally, also to stress the fact that you're taking some time to transition, but 3 years is quite fast, actually. So people should be mindful that we are not entering late in the game, but we are keeping on accelerating, and that's something that I can hear from every corner of the NGFS. I think that's really something that needs to be understood. That we will be accelerating in the coming weeks with a number of stress tests. I have 2024 in mind for a few of you, and so on and so forth. So maybe I can use the last few minutes that we have for a discussion, and I'd like to throw one question to all of you. From where you sit, is there any policies that the other are implemented or that you've heard of that you very much like, you would be able to take on board? Or, I mean, if you had a dream that you can implement in your own country, what would it be?
Maybe I can have some comments here.
Yes, please, Prashant. You're a specialist in science fiction, so maybe you're into dreams.
Yeah, I like to think about what the future might be like. There's 2 policies I really do admire from having heard you all speak. Gabor, I mean, I think this idea in Hungary, this concept of trying to use your powers to green finance is very important. And I think some of the kind of incentive structures you're building in to encourage green mortgages, encourage investment into some of the green bonds is particularly welcome. I do wish that it would get more airplay. I know that we've blogged about it internally a few times. And Chichi, I must say you and in Brazil as well, I think one of the really important things is to move quickly. And in both cases, you've used your supervisory powers to actually try to sort of step in and make sure that debt products, be it to agriculture in the case of Brazil or to industry more generally, it's sort of complying with all these do no significant harm for land use, for issues like this. And I know, Jessica, that in Malaysia, the concept of sort of prohibiting certain activities is part and parcel of your taxonomy, which I think is a very, very welcome departure. So I think it's great what you're all doing on stress testing and disclosure, but let's not wait for those results and data to get great until we do more ourselves. We can learn a lot from each other already. And I know that in India, priority sector lending is a very, very interesting policy that the central bank, the RBI, operates, where it's actually encouraging or directing credit guidance into sectors that they know to be important. In the case of India, it's currently some other underbanked people, some of the poorer people, some of the tribal societies, but it's already being reused for renewable energy, and it could be used for other things too. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Prashant. Indeed, I mean, I had at least one of your dreams in mind. I mean, getting quicker to where we want to be. Any other views from the panel on that? Maybe Jessica? No, sorry, Najwa. Please, Najwa, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to come first to answer your question regarding the most inspiring, I would say, practices that we are observing across central banks. And just, I would say that the experience of peer experience of other countries can be an important driver of action for other central banks. And the current international developments, such as the emerging taxonomies from central banks, but also the evolving agenda on mandatory disclosures are quite inspiring for us, and they will improve central bank's efforts to consider climate risks. I would not say that would be dreams, since we are planning to implement a simplified taxonomy for the banking sector with the support of the World Bank. But for the disclosure side, I think that implementing mandatory expectations may be difficult for the time being. So this is something that we are striving for in the very near future.
Thanks, Najwa. Jessica, you had something in mind, I think.
Yeah, just a quick comment, Jean. I think this is one of the things that we learned and we applied was the collaborative approach as well, because this is a field that for many central banks and supervisory authorities is relatively new. And I think so as we go about thinking about the tools we want to develop and the frameworks, we have found that working collaboratively with industry to some extent and also with the other external stakeholders has been particularly useful to just accelerate that journey. And I believe that this is going to be an iterative process. So, we're quite mindful that whatever we put out there today is very likely to evolve and continue to be shaped by what we learn as we go along. So I think this was something we also borrowed from, what we saw in other countries, and it has worked to great effect for us in Malaysia.
Thanks, Jessica. And I think Gabor has a point to make in response to Prashant's comments.
Yeah, indeed. So Prashant mentioned our scheme, which is basically a green capital requirement discount scheme with a view to encourage more green lending and more green financing by banks. And of course, also at the international level, there is a huge debate whether it's a good idea or a not so good idea to use capital requirements, which is a very powerful tool in the hand of supervisors and central banks to nudge banks in a greener direction. And we believe it is a good idea, but of course we also believe that it should be done with extreme care. And we always say that basically the main goal of this tool is to reduce the transition risks in the banking system. So by increasing the supply of green lending, the amount of, the volume of transition risks can be decreased. And our preliminary experience is positive, but again, it's not a silver bullet. It has helped in Hungary to jumpstart the green bond market. We had absolutely zero green bond market just 2 years ago. Now it's growing very fast. Partly thanks to this scheme, this incentive. Now banks have started flagging their loans. I mean, they are flagging their green loans and doing reporting because they need to do that for the capital requirement discount. Actually, some of the banks are now working on developing a comprehensive green loan framework, whereas a couple of years ago, no bank had such a framework. And just to mention one more example, banks are now actively discussing the difference between the EU taxonomy and the climate bond standards taxonomy and the green loan principles. I mean, again, a couple of years ago, I think almost nobody was aware of these standards. I mean, it's a big sign that things have started to emerge, but it's not an easy and not a walk in the park. So, for instance, in the case of green mortgages, we still have a lot to do because we still haven't reached the breakthrough with energy efficient lending. So still a lot to do, but so far we have positive experience with this capital requirement scheme.
Thanks, Gabor. I think you've mentioned this capital requirement issue as being a hot topic in the community, and indeed it's quite a debated one. But I think debate is always useful. So I look forward to the development in that debate. Maybe unless Ricardo or Shushi, you had a point to make. Yes, Shushi, please.
Yes, thank you, John. So for us in the Philippines, we are undertaking a whole of government approach to mainstreaming sustainable finance in the country. And the Banco Central participates in the interagency collaboration we call actually as the Green Force. And together with the Department of Finance, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and other critical government agencies such as the Climate Change Commission, the Department of Energy, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, just among others. So this, what we call as the Green Force, is actually working on two key projects, namely the Sustainable Finance Roadmap and the Sustainable Finance Guiding Principles. So the roadmap will set high-level action plans of the government to promote sustainable finance and facilitate investment in green, sustainable projects and activities. The one on the Sustainable Finance Guiding Principles also intends to establish a common understanding among stakeholders and provide principles-based guidance in identifying economic activities considered to be sustainable. For us, since we are an archipelagic country, in terms of data collection, the BSP collects selected balance sheet accounts on a regional basis. And then we collect loan portfolio information disaggregated by economic sectors. So we intend to enhance these existing reports in line with the results of the vulnerability assessment and climate stress testing exercises to be conducted by the Banco Central together with the volunteer banks, actually already representing almost 50% of the total assets of the Philippine banking system. Thank you.
Thank you, Shushi. What I'm taking is that we may look different, but we are so much alike from each of our institutions, because all of what you're mentioning echoes to my daily experience as well. Perhaps we are getting to the end of the session, and I was wondering whether you had, some of you at least, some messages for the audience that may be finance professionals working all across the globe. So do you have any pressing messages for them before we close?
I'll just say one word maybe, that international investors now are much more focused on this net zero kind of concept. And I'm conscious that many of the emerging markets are looking for international investments to come in and help power the transition. And I think it's really quite important to make sure that the kind of that penetrates through the domestic banking sector, that when we're investing in new assets now, that it is kind of consistent with the net zero goal that the world is sort of increasingly setting itself.
Indeed, Prashant. Maybe on my side, I mean, we may have feared at some point that this whole green finance and sustainable conversation was very much a conversation for, advanced economies, central banks, and I think the sessions today has clearly demonstrated that this is not the case, and there is a lot that is happening, and even more that is happening in emerging market countries than in advanced economies. So my messages for the audience would be to keep an eye on these developments because they may be very significant in the years to come. So thank you, everybody. I think we are now really coming near to the end of the session. A huge thank you to all of those who were up very early in the morning to attend the session. Ricardo, that's really for you. And very much looking to see you soon in around the table of the NGFS.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.